Hello, my name is Brian Palmer. I received a degree in physical chemistry in 1990 with distinction from the University of Guelph. The next year I got a Bachelor of Education, and largely motivated by this found and increasingly burdensome philosophical project that the universe seems to have given me, to my own lifelong detriment. I attempted to reconcile and further my work by pursuing a PhD. Unfortunately, health struggles and getting stomped on by wokeness derailed any attempt beyond getting the master. So I do have a master in arts. My area of specialty is philosophy of mind. And so yes, a lot of ongoing life struggles, and things have gotten worse since COVID. I'm not sure how long I'm even going to be able to stay housed. So I have a few months here to hope for a miracle employment, miracle housing, and all the rest of that, all those other miracles for my health problems that never get addressed. Lost my doctor 20 years ago, pay taxes, don't get services. Not a happy camper, not happy with this country at all. That's Canada, where I live. Of course, I have tremendous concern. When I came out of school in the 90s, I was filled with concern for the path of humanity, and I had no idea how bad it was going to get, or how much we've actually been lying about what we've been doing and for so long. So the intentions of this work are mixed. There is, of course, the attempt to communicate this, what I'll call a reinterpretation of all of science, of hard science in particular. But there's an ethical concern here, because I think part of the problem of human agency is we continue to operate in the background over some of these classical metaphysics that I'm going to attempt to demotivate in this presentation today. This is really like a metaphysical comic book, if you will, where I made the first three diagrams have surrounding completed work, which I'm largely extracting from for the copy. And then out of that came some subsequent diagrams to expand and flesh out this non-classical metaphysics for the universe, for reality. We're going to find that these words that we have the feeling, the clear and distinct idea that the reference are clear, and so are the meanings. We're going to discover there's still a tremendous amount of different use and inconsistency in meanings for all of these vaunted terms, particularly reality. And I'm going to try to draw attention to how I think we got into these loggerheads, these Chinese finger puzzle loggerheads that we seem so set on furthering. So again, the theme here is to identify the legacy of denied premises that we keep dragging into our agency without reflection, classicalism. I think we're at the end of the Enlightenment too. People don't see the developmental piece. I think we need to radically transform our values and systems here. Tinkering with the status quo, I don't think is going to improve our lot, and will probably lead to, let's call it, societal contraction, right? It's not going to be wholesale collapse. In fact, the contraction has begun. The possibility of an exponential or a massive tipping to worse within the next 10 to 20 years seems highly probable too, given our failure to deeply confront the path, the troubling path that we're individually and collectively on. So this is a reinterpretation of all science, which has this ethical hope behind it. If you find that my model is consistent, other than the confrontation and altering of certain buried problems with the classical view, I believe paints a different picture, other than this nihilistic, fatalistic, alone in the universe, everything unlikely, mostly harsh, empty space. I understand why people continue to look at the universe from that tacit perspective, but I don't think the evidence that has emerged, particularly since quantum mechanics and the very strong confirmation of non-locality, I feel like we're still stuck in failing to learn the lessons here, and instead insist on shoving it all into a monism and a single theory, largely because of our undenied original sin, right? I'm going to borrow the Catholics' metaphor here and extend it. I think we're all just too dangerously motivated by the illusions of certainty and control, right? We created culture to cover up this background malaise, the existential crisis, the persistent anxiety over being forced to exist, forced to come into a life, and where the moment you achieve self-awareness, you're also aware of your end, that you're fated to die. We have people who want to live forever, and I don't think you really want that, given the likelihood that our civilization has already peaked. So I don't know what you'd be living forever for. I would rather live a life, a shorter life, making sacrifices, committed to, moderating these what are a lot of unavoidable bad outcomes, right? I was just reading the other day, some people think we're not going to have enough fresh water in 10 years. This just should be terrifying. So electric, making everybody own a gas car and an electric car, because that's all that's going to happen, I don't think is really where our focus should be. We should be enforcing very severe water restrictions in terms of waste, and in terms of not allowing it to be consumed in industrial practices specifically meant to generate more fossil fuels. Like, I hope people understand the doubling down problem there. Anyways, I don't want to get off the copy or the narrative too far here. So this is a reinterpretation of all of science. I'm going to make some tweaks in our methods, in our conceptual creation and definition, and I'm going to take this information and hear what are we concerned with, right? We're going to work from this metaphor of the universe as this, what I call the cosmic cone kludge. Really, it's the two classical cosmic cone kludge. So I'm going to work with this as full of sound or strong content, and I'm going to parse it out in a different way and do some other machinations, some intellectual, inferential machinations here, and then present my view of the universe. Now, at some point, does every radical thing I hypothesize here need to be true for my model to have some value? No, I don't believe so. What I believe is that it's got to be thinking like this that carries us forward. So the end of science, it seems, is also the end of this too classical, reductive, monist, mechanistic. Really, this is a Newtonian legacy problem akin to the better defended against Cartesian problem, right? the inherent problems of Cartesian dualism that keep re-invoking in both lay and academic circles. So here are some preliminaries for the entire cartoon. That's not what we wanted. Let's go back. Thank you. So I work as a neo-empiricist, but I do not feel the need to pick absolutely over the rationalist empiricist divide for this. Instead, I am also an ontological and epistemic pluralist of a preliminary sort, and as such look to integrate beyond logic. So I'll talk about translogical, right? Placeholders. I'm going to be impugned for woo-woo, for working outside of the vetted toolkit, the vetted, categorical kind kit, right? Natural kinds, whatever scientific kinds. I'm not going to be doing that, but I do believe we need to look to put models together beyond logic, okay? And this will come out in the wash a bit. So I'm looking to integrate beyond logic, not simply divide and conquer, right? I think we haven't properly confronted this mechanism of perception that yields to conception by which we come to cleave the world into its kinds, right? To cleave at the joint. This cleaving nature at joints is an assumption of classicalism that we should have abandoned a long time ago. It's a big part of the problem. I'm shifting to a more fractal view. And right there, we're already dealing with paradoxical boundaries. So the notion of integrating beyond logic is no more challenging than the sorts of properties that fractals already demonstrate. And there's many instances, Cantor's dust, I could go on and on here. So I don't really see what I'm proposing being this scandalous, but I'm sure it's going to be taken that way. So what am I talking about? Divide and conquer. Well, body-mind. I mean, that's what we do. And if you do it in the way Descartes did, you can't solve the interaction problem by definition. We got rationalism, empiricism, realism, irrealism, idealism, physicalism, which was once called materialism. But that gets confused with conspicuous consumerism. So we were right to do this coming in. I mean, this is what we see in science. We get into dead ends. I mean, in the late 19th century, they thought science was done. And then we're here. So this moving towards the truth by getting into these dead ends, by conceiving of entities that turn out to be at best temporary and even misleading placeholders like phlogiston, the ether, and things like that. So this isn't a problem in that we need to stop using these conceptions or dichotomies. It's just that we need to change our perspective on how the epistemic agent. You see, we want to bring to all of these spun out results of both analysis, right, the rationalist, argumentative side of showing that a belief is true versus the statistical, inductive, empirical side that some empirical fact is ceteris paribus true, right? And this is the big difference between inductive claims. Inductive claims are always subject to counterexamples without the theory being overthrown, because you're dealing with objects in the special sciences and they're far more complex. And at this juncture, although some still believe we're going to do this with a theory of everything, I don't think we're ever going to deduce in the special sciences. And of course, there's a massive replication crisis. And so, there are problems with content at the level of the special sciences in various directions. So fortunately, my reinterpretation works from more of the results from hard physics, although I'm going to link problems together in, I think, very novel and telling ways here. So we need to step back. We need to see the translogical semantic structure, these residues, and take these residues of analysis and modeling and measurement, and we need to reintegrate over logics, not reduce to some finite logical model. So we want to find a structure in which to build a plurality of what I would call pre to post ontological models. Now here the pre and post simply means they're semantic placeholders. It's not like I'm defining a sub-ontological reality. I'm making the claim with a placeholder that we are actually not in a place to properly be doing ontology or metaphysics at all, because we continue to work in this problematic background classical mode that we should have let go of a long time ago. So the whole idea of pre-ontological, which I use primarily, or post-ontological, is as a placeholder for the proper pluralist ontology, which will require its own missing structure to relate all of these negative contents of analysis, right, that just spin out into, you know, more arguments and sub-arguments, never really resolving the issue that created the problem. You know, Frege's problem, not solved, of less concern, but of course people continue to work on that problem, and that basic problem of whether or not you know, believing something false is irrational or not, and the problem of using only logic to produce a semantic theory. I mean, that is still biting as hard against philosophers and scientists today as it ever was. So, you know, the fact that problems go out of fashion doesn't mean these problems don't still bear. And so I think, unfortunately, humanity has a tendency to deny half of the problems that should be in core consideration, exactly because they're underlying assumptions that, if we took a look at them, would see, hey, well, these are more problematic than the negative ends we keep getting to moving downstream in the more tractable way. So let's just refer to the title, right? This is the title. We can only have the right cosmological model if we have the right ontology, metaphysics, and epistemology. You can't, if our model is incorrect and we're trying to derive ontological or metaphysical or epistemological analyses on the basis of those empirical facts, or at least in this case how they've been kludged together, well, we're off the garden path there, right? And it works the other way. If I'm going to try to provide a different ontological, metaphysical, and epistemological perspective, that will provide a different cosmological model, but it's going to be entirely consistent with all of the content, the uncontroversial content here. So I do consider to do resolute research. I've been struggling with that lately because of my economic woes. But I try to continue my research at the fine point of concern, my university ensconced work into original intentionality first focused me on, right? And that was in regards to contrasting the more materialist-leaning informational semantic, materialist, naturalistic, monist approach of Fred Dretske, really the first person to walk this path in the 70s, against that of the tacit dualist Tyler Berg. And of course, the book is Origins of Objectivity. So, in spite of their seeming incommensurateness in terms of their ontological assumptions or metaphysical assumptions, I find a tremendous amount of shared overlap in their approach. They're quite reconcilable, and so where they disagree, I think that's going to come down to where they're right or wrong about ontology. The thing with Tyler Burge is not saying I'm a dualist. He's just pointing out the problem that the special science you can't do special sciences without the notion of function, which it adds the notions of veridicality conditions or accuracy conditions or norms, right? That's what we typically call them in culture, to the functional sufficiency, right? And this is not something that you're going to find applied at the level of electrons and protons. So this is a huge problem that you have to add in these other categories of essential function, property, norm-bearing, accuracy conditions, and yet it just seems very unlikely to ever reduce to a set of terms that don't have such notions in them, apparently fatally. Well, I'm going to try to chip away at explaining why that case is, and it's not going to require a hard ontological cut. Like, I just think this is part of the problem of classicalism. The digitizing aspects of language go too far, and we got to logic by assuming there were problems with natural language. I'm going to also be subtly making the argument that maybe we're wrong about that. Maybe language is more perfect in its paradoxical, polysemous, ambiguous, right, character than we've imagined. So, original intentionality, just to draw the thread from the medieval thinkers who introduced the word intentio, and then Brentano reclaims this term in the late 19th century by coining intentionality as the hallmark of the mental, right? This is a problem. This problem of intentionality is often neglected by scientific-leaning philosophers. They work higher. They seem more concerned with the symbol grounding problem. But I think these are bookended problems, right? The problem of original intentionality is a developmental, evolutionary, bottom-up, universal problem. The symbol grounding problem is one of the downstream emergence of our basic language capacities, and then how they spilled over into our rational, scientific, logical, mathematical languages. So the other thing is this idea of original. So original means prototypically first. So we are talking of not the actual first living cell. We don't have to name that. So the original life is just some prototype in its time that was the first. Maybe 10,000 living bacteria all occurred at once and they were identical. Okay, this is not going to change the notion of original intentionality. So sometimes I might just say first. Okay, so where my work has gone lately is it's very focused at this level of first or original life, and the problem of the missing intention of the concept life. This is another one of these analyses that has spun out and has nothing but gaps. So in other works, which are easy to find here on my academia page, my profile, I've gotten to this late project through what I think is a very good attempt to finalize the definition of life also by getting away from the classical assumptions that are the reason why we can't see that we have the definition to hand, but we keep insisting. And the problem is going to come down to the fact that perception isn't giving us reality as it is necessarily. It's giving us affordances so insofar as they give us fitness and we're perpetuated. Hoffman, I forget his name, but he's done a wonderful book and has a wonderful model on the idea that fitness does not select for accuracy and perception, and I think he's right. This dynamic between seeing the world and bringing the world into being is well understood in the Eastern traditions, and yet it's entirely discounted, and it's created this soulless approach to understanding the connection between mind and reality. So this is going to tie into the problem with the definition of reality. So, like Tyler Burge, I believe the first or original minds are also the first perceivers, representers, mental state bearers, behaviors. Unlike Burge, I am wary of two extent biases within philosophy of mind. Both are pernicious, and neither, I think, are well appreciated, barely acknowledged. And I think these are the two main ones, blinding us to a better focal point to aim at to solve such chestnuts as the mind-body problem at all. So I imagine this king problem, the mind-body problem, we'll call the problem of consciousness the queen problem. On my reinterpretive approach will in a partial sense go moot. So this is going to be about this divide and conquer limit. And instead of pushing forward at some point, we're going to step back and reintegrate what we've divided and conquered into its own whole at a translogical level. This is I think the only opening for pluralism and for a renewed science that has a better ethical motivation to get the collective to believe differently so we can act differently to avoid the worst of what might be coming. So, so these, on my approach, a lot of these classically sourced divide and conquer loggerheads will just stop engaging with them. We will integrate something from them, but in the background they will become of less ongoing concern. So they all might, given the right non-classical approach and the appropriately novel metaphysics, simply become muted and fade away. So the first problem is this idea of the mind as a container, as that's equivalent to Newton's view of space-time, right? Like space is a box, and things evolve in this box over time. And I think this has contaminated our views of the mind, and this is what we do, is we shove it all into the brain, and I just think that's ridiculous. I don't believe the mind exists within the brain, except for the functional fulcrum by which perception spills over to this consciousness and with its novel forms of conception. So, we understand Cartesianism. We got to watch out for that. Are they proposing another homunculi in the brain? Because you're just going to get an infinite regress, right? The problem, don't define mind and body at the outset such that they could never interact. You can't solve a problem of incompatible logic by defining that incompatibility in from the start, right? So this other idea that I really wish to weaken is this idea of the universe as some empty and disinterested background of pure hostile mechanism. This is as much, I think, with this nihilism and this fatalism that has gripped us, is driven by what I think is a bereft understanding of the real complexities and possible nature of the universe and possible real connection of mind to matter, to life, right? So the other problem, also very pernicious, is anthropocranial centrism. It's this insistence that we're going to start with the most complicated aspect of the universe, the human brain, to try to solve the problems of consciousness, intentionality. It seems to me it's just way too downstream, and this is where Tyler Burge knocked this back by looking for the principles of objectivity in what's given to perception as it emerges. Already he shifted it back. Now he stays cranial. He in the end he stops at organisms with brains like shrimp or bees. So this is a good move, I think, to the right level at which original intentionality really emerges, I think, with free living life. But it's not far enough, right? He's still under the grip of that bias. Okay, so my belief is, even though Burge makes a big positive step in being willing to start his hunt for the origins of objectivity, and by this tacitly subjectivity too, well before the human brain enters the evolutionary stage, in looking for the origins of pre-human forms of perception, he still exhibits a neurocentrism I think is residually biased by the same tacit concern for the supposed specialness of the human brain minds. So, of course, this is the path I went from Dretske to Burge, and now maybe a kind of biocentrism here in my approach, although I don't think my model is biocentric in the way those marginal theoreticians would take it, but I think we would agree on a lot here. So the ethical aim is to balance our current one-sided metaphysics, right? It's not going to be that it's wrong. The universe is not going to be something that's right or wrong for all time as much as we believe it is. It's going to require a rightness in some circumstances that moves us epistemically forward, and then that, because we're creating reality, as we go over, the background is going to shift, and that's going to expose the flaws of that thinking that were inherent to even going down that path. Well, these are these moments of radical tipping, right? Of paradigm shifting in science, and I don't think we're going to find a toe, but I think there are new theoretical avenues that will require a very radical, non-classical sort of paradigm shift. So my ethical aim is to balance this, right? This image right here, that so pig-headedly embeds us in, I think, a bereft and buried premising that we should be jettisoning based on our current understandings of hard science. So, right, I think I'm going to expose, as I say it, all the background elephant under the rug sweeping problems. I don't know if that's a mixed metaphor or a malapropism, but I just want to stress that what we swept under the rug and choose to not see is there is the size of an elephant, is to my thinking. And one of these big problems is how knowing what numbers actually are might impact our epistemology. We act as if we can have absolute faith in the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, yet without knowing what these objects are, right? And Benacerraf's two forking papers, of course, paint the problem there for Platonism, which is still the default, but now we're moving to a structuralist take for understanding mathematical objects. I'm going to turn out to be a structuralist, but not, they're still logistic. They're still looking to be reductive, and this is why in the end they get down, and it reminds me of Aristotle again, what is the essence? Is it in the actuality or the potentiality? He could never get out of that trap. And the structuralists get into the trap of what's primary, the relata or the relation. And again, I just think this is the divide and conquer problem that we keep ending at and not seeing. So there is one overriding, sorry about that, that is so frustrating. There is one overriding, centrally motivating, and novel empirical claim. Like, I'm going to throw out all of these old notions, a priori, like they're just all going to have to go. They've served us well, but they're defunct. So this is going to be a contingently necessary claim, right? Kripkean. So this is always in the background here. And it's obscured by rationalism, right? Rationalism, it sees in its mind all scales and objects unproblematically, right? That's how it can conceive of a big bang, a singularity, a thing that has no volume and doesn't exist in time, but yet has an inner structure, right? We can recover its entropic or informational phase space. So that's a trick of reasoning that I can't grasp as solid, but who am I to say? And the other, the empiricists, of course, as I pointed out, they're obsessed with the human brain and how to explain the mind being in that box, right? And I don't think that's going to work either. So this is my overriding insight. You need to contemplate this. I think it's true. And the implications of it are also fatal to forwarding, this kludge here as it stands. I'm going to recreate this kludge in a different structure, right? So, overriding theme, no seeing possible ever on any terms below the scale of the atom, all right? No rational seeing and no empirical seeing. And this is what we have, right? This is where all the problems of observation start, at the scale of the atom. And that's because the objects by which we see ultimately have to be made out of those same mereological objects. So that there is no possibility of seeing I gotta stop doing that. That there is no possibility of seeing made physically manifest below the contingent scale of the atom in naively found empirical terms literally means no direct seeing at or below this level in any transparent epistemic way is possible either, ever. Instead, the deepest observer begged into the instrumentality of quantum mechanics appears only in a quasi way, air quotes, right? Metaphor, that's air quotes. Sometimes I'm coining, sometimes I'm making a metaphorical placeholder. So this is part of my semantic approach, that I don't believe you can take all the metaphors out of philosophy. I think the best philosophy papers always have at least one beautiful metaphor disguised as a fact in them, right? So the instrumentality of quantum mechanics appears only in a quasi way and acting through us, in first showing the way to how integration of concrete differences, right, starting back from first cellular life, finally becomes the representation of abstract absolutes. So many think the future salvation of hard science rests on finding a theory of everything, a TOE, bringing quantum mechanics and general relativity under one seamless universalizing and fundamentalizing, so I'll call that a totalizing model. I believe pursuing this hope, given the prima facie evidence, the incorrigibility and background premising between the models is fatal, a fool's errand. What the scientism ensuing around this two-blinkered pursuit of a holy grail for physics has allowed, sadly, is a Bigfoot foot-sized wedge for postmodernist excess to set reason far back into rapacious promotion of Irrealist subjectivity and small-minded relativism. Science bears responsibility for its own stultifying mendacity in this, but the polemic ends here. So let's think on this here. The idea of life and mind independence has a strong, right, a deep or big history situated empirical justification. We know the earth had no life when it first formed, but we also lately suspect life on this planet was unstoppable, fired up only to be burned back down several times as the once viciously and biologically hostile volcanic and much differently watered and atmosphered planet cooled enough to be finally hospitable to life in relative perpetuity. So that's conservatively as early as 3.4 billion years ago, but they keep pushing it further back. But it seems life would not be put off. So accepting, it hardly seems like a miracle here, and yet we want to make the cosmic story how it's a miracle, and I just think we should invert this problem in a sense. So accepting we have no straightforward way to know if this is all the life there is in the visible universe now, right? Meaning now, but somewhere else. But that's problematic because of relativity, right? We won't get into those complexities. So even if there is some other life in the universe, right? If we're talking about our visible universe, which is what that cone represents, we and these other life forms are all tied to the same isotropic perspective of deep history, right? Aimed right back to the same Big Bang singularity in some affiliation. So in discovering the Hubble expansion, rewinding time in our models, and by this undoing universal development, it seems a strong and cogent claim that at some point in the entire history of the visible universe, it was completely devoid of any signs or forms of local life. This is an even less contentious claim when we consider this same universe was once necessarily free of minds such as ours. Perhaps only slightly more than 200,000 years ago on some evolutionary accounts. But I would argue quantum mechanics and many other results from science already show such a take the mind band-aid off view of things as questionable and even naive. If, as I suspect, the entire universe at the Big Bang singularity and prior to any particular life or mind found extent on Earth, already essentially contained, right? There's that problematic Newtonian word I think we need to worry about. The container metaphors are going to prove a problem in a better metaphysics. I believe that the universe, even prior to any life or minds or any physical possibility of them as they're constructed now, already essentially contain the telic potential for particular embodied vitality and embodied mindedness, but was in this duration also seamlessly and at this juncture primarily a quantum holistic, a pre-mereological universe. And we can reconstruct it beyond observation is what I'm going to claim, but we can't integrate it to the mereology in a single model. It just isn't how it works. Well, if life and or mind is in part or whole realized by leveraging quantum processes, right? Life, must in some natural and non-intentional sense first work through, not around nature, right? Life emerges at the scale of quantum mechanics. So it's negotiating the lawfulness in its own developmental and other mechanisms. And the DNA, and right, something epistemic, right? Informational, communicative is going on there. Thus, pre-life, life, must also in some sense, at least locally, infallibly, pre-master as if knowledge of the quantum realm to first better be, exist, live at all. So, if so, how could our universe ever truly be so generally and non-locally, i.e. totally and dispersively devoid of whatever essence was to ultimately drive the core developmental steps that did in fact become first life or mine, right? In any sort of absolute terms. I don't think it's possible. This is a definitional problem again. And doesn't this identical assumption of absolute mind independence then, in the guise of a res cogitans versus reg extensa, not also fatally ground the mind-body problem in Cartesian terms in as logically unsolvable way by definition here too, right? This is the thing we keep doing and we keep expecting to put back together. It's you can't get there from where we decided to go problem. So in one sense, I believe the universe prior to the emergence of life, when we can be certain it had no particular specially conscious minds in it, was, if only in this thinner or in a thinner, residual or relative sense, not ever tangibly mind dependent, in the sense the hard stop definition of realism so invisibly assumes and keeps promoting, right? Why have we not considered our definition as the problem instead of tipping to this a realist reaction to what could just require a better definition? So, where am I here? So yet in another sense, it's going to turn out due to the true nature of what both tangibly and functionally facilitates both in mind, a very much minded and vital universe for its entire history. And this is going to be in an all-encompassing but non-trivial sense, right? It's going to be in the Aristotelian / quantum holistic sense that the universe is always being a mind, been alive, right? So this is a little paradoxical here, but just bear with me for now. So what we have is a para absurdio, not a classical absurdio from the classical definition, right? Which is about absolute mind independence and unproblematic existence on that basis. I don't think these are how the universe works. So, right, the idea that real things are always concrete, substantial, and perceivable to some significant degree. This, I think, is just wishful thinking. So I for one, am not so fit to abandon the folk intuitions behind the naive endorsement of realism. Instead of adapting its conceptual opposition to realism just for the failure of the concept to mean well. So why not try to fix the definition first? Logic summarily entails, the example here. This problem is akin to this making this metaphysical claim, right? There is no ultimate nature of reality. Well, logic summarily entails that is the ultimate nature of reality. And so in a sense, it semantically misses the mark, even as it states truth. So what few see here is there's an equivocation between particular to general claims being made. So are we not making the same mistake with our multi-thousand-year-old definitions of reality? You're given something exists, right? That is reality. So given something exists, that is part of reality, whether it is mind independent or not. So maybe it's both neither. If only when we finally reconcile the explicatory tensions between diachronic existing versus synchronic becoming, and this is a big problem in the naturalistic semantic theories around function, because there's a story of causes of which may not exist to explain how the functions came to take the form they did, right? Which is both the genotypic and phenotypic nature of that process over time, versus the functioning now, the diachronic at a time. And these are orthogonal aspects of explanation that are very difficult to logically reconcile to. And I think they're going to require translogical integration. And so instead, this totalized manifesting, this one turning, right? That's the etymology of universe, is what the universally, the always a big mind was always materially, right, doing. And so because it's always been making life and mind in its own background, not by a cosmic fluke, but by an inevitable law of large numbers of a massive random walk. The universe, this one turn, was already affecting what exists, such that the very possibility of such a pure general mind independence existing in the world could make no sense. It makes no empirical sense to me. Thus, in these relative terms, even as so much time passes before the emergence of the first local only and particularly manifest lives or mind, this universe, this one turn, is always substantially life and mind evolving in ways that make the classical definition quasi-adios right from its coining, but not the folk intuition that led to the original coining of philosophical realism. So I'm going to maintain a close orbit to all folk intuitions here. Otherwise, you get into the armchair philosopher problem where someone points to something that exists and then tells you why it's not real. And I don't know what anybody could possibly mean by that bit of sophistry, but it's nonsense to say things like that. So we simply are not defining reality as well as we could. And I've taken preliminary steps to do this in a geometrical way, but we're not going to concern too much with that. Instead, our focus will be on the new metaphysic constructed by first exploding classicalism apart at cosmic scales, but all without any obviation of the original factual content, right? Facts are a problematic entity all on their own. So I'm not going to abandon any of these, the sound enough facts that are motivating the classical take. So in other words, while all current interpretations are subject to change, the numbers, the bare Ding and Sitch models, theories, laws, as themselves, not as they're represented, and all the measured quantities combined with their SI units representing data points relativized to some now much better set of prototypes than some random and vain king's foot, are finally cross-expressed in this standard isologically interconsistent magnitudes and variables, right? This is so we can quantify properties or substances, and this remains intact, right? But for the replication crisis in special and other empirical science, we're going to assume this data is trustworthy. So let's go to the diagram for a bit. So Bill Bryson wrote this book, A Brief History of Everything. Now, 20 years ago, trying to follow up intuitions that have led me to this point, I conceived of writing the 60-page monograph to do a similar thing. It seemed very important to me to understand how we got here. You had to understand the whole story and developmental structure of the universe. These things couldn't be so disconnected as the classical view has them, right? For the immensity of the thing we are and the thing that we're in by which we've come to be that. And so that's also found here. It's called Why Our Minds Are Like the Universe, right? And so the cosmic concluge is like a compression, a diagrammatic compression of the results of 100 years of painstaking empirical and theoretical work, right? So let's just quickly review some of the basic features here. So of course this is the Big Bang here. Now really, although we might think about this going forward, we retrodict it backwards from our now here. We recover this evidence that suggests the universe has been expanding and largely at a constant rate, although this is one of the interesting features I'm going to touch on. It seems the Hubble acceleration has accelerated, and interestingly, it seemed to started to have done this right around the emergence of first life. Now, I don't think this is a coincidence, but I don't think many are talking about it as such. We get back to this wall where we can't observe, and this is at the emission of the cosmic microwave background. So this is recombination, right? So prior to this, all the light is bound up in a plasma, right? The universe is entirely opaque. There is no light traveling through it. It's so hot. It's all a single entangled plasma. But even then, it's this trend of increasing volume allows energy to drop, right? This is just the classic thermodynamic interpretation. So if the thing becomes better, it becomes less dense, it cools off. And due to the laws, there are implicit tipping points at certain scales of energy and temperature such that these global, this is all universe, phase transition occurs. And so this is based on the reconstruction we're looking at about 200 million years after the Big Bang. So what's important to understand is this exotic inflation, which is supposed to have taken place in 10 to minus 32 seconds, and we're going to deal with the matter antimatter asymmetry happens during here, the vacuum energy, it's a mathematical reconstruction that has been stuck on to the placeholder that marks CBM. So these measures are all shots in the dark to a large extent. The further we get back and anything before, we're not observing a damn thing. This is mathematical reconstruction. So, this is what I'm trying to represent here. This is not to scale at all. Now, and what we get is at the point after inflation, rough estimates are that the universe is about baseball size. So we've got some other weird coincidences too. So when the CMB is released, the approximate size of the universe would seem to be 3 times the size of our current galaxy. Quite tiny universe, really. And of course, so I call that the normal matter error, right? And there are all these questions about, is this a tensed or not tensed? Like really what you're dealing with here is also a dimensional compression. So if you were to think of the circular slices, those are just from one isotropic perspective, from one foliation of space-time back to the Big Bang. You would think of that cross-section as a hyposphere, right? So the universe is in this sense spherical. Now, is it closed? Is it open? Right? It could be what's the word? I'm not parabola, hyperbola, right? It could be hyperbolic. So we don't know. It seems to be pretty close to that balancing point there. So this is the idea of whether all of reality is just the nows as they occur, collected together, or whether it's all of that. And this is the notion of a block universe. I'm leaning myself towards a block, multi-universe-like interpretation, but I'm not going to speak in those terms at all. So again, what else do we want to point out here? So part of, again, I'm not going to worry about the numbers. Different people will give you different numbers, right? We seem to be fairly firm on the larger scale time durations. They seem pretty solid numbers right now. And of course, if you're curious, the reason why what do I have here? The diameter of the visible universe, some 13.8 billion years after the Big Bang, why isn't it not 13 ball? Because of course space is expanding, and this is the thing I don't really understand very well. that this doesn't affect the time feature, but this probably has to do with the fact that photons, relative to their own frame of reference, experience no passage of time, another bizarre consequence of relativity. All right, so the elephantine kludge in the Cohn's rational reconstruction. This is what we're going to turn to now. So I suspect most academics by now have some passing understanding and even has spent some considerable time in contemplation of the cosmos as it is represented in these three-dimension down cosmic cones, right? These present as highly stylized pseudo-models at best, are not in any way truly representative of the scale differences glossed in making the pictorial kludge. Just as it is impossible to construct a scale model of the solar system on any normally sized canvas, as the canvas need be well beyond city size to do so, were we to try the same for this kludge, which impossibly anastomizes two radically different scales, right, pre-inflation, post-inflation, of temporal energetic concern, it would be even harder to produce a suitably concrete canvas to render it more consistently, right? Because of this, these graphical means woefully misrepresent how this cosmic cone kludge would have to be drawn, such that only a single graph were constructed in the perfect Cartesian algebraic sense. So not the kludge of poorly fit and rendered scale and curves that it is for this. So misleadingly informs the lay folk, and likely even many of those learned, not intimately acquainted with the maths, ignored in constructing it in such a loosey-goosey mapping. This is in the main because the mathematically inferred, never to be directly or even, as I will argue soon, indirectly observable or even as if detectable, exotic inflationary period covers a time so slight and a universal expansion of space so massive that the canvas on which it could be so graphically rendered uncompromised in some singular and decluded Cartesian coordinate system, also consistent with the Hubble expansion, might include a very significant part of the university of itself. So I did the math. I haven't had it checked. I'm sure if it's off, it's not off by much. So to get a duration of 10 to the minus 32 seconds compatible graphically with the subsequent 13.8 billion years, such to show everything on a human parsable time scale, requires a canvas of the order of magnitude of 13.8 billion times the number of seconds in a year divided by 10 to the 32 seconds, or else the exotic expansion will always appear as a vertical line, which represents a physical impossibility. So this amounts to needing almost 10 to the 50 unit divisions for the x-axis, and yet even placing these divisions 1 millimeter apart, we get a canvas of some 10 to the 47 meters, which is wider than the visible universe by a factor of roughly its square. So this is a viciously impossible to precisely render graphical kludge indeed. All right, let me pause this just for a moment. All right, there I did a little time traveling. So the CCK is pretty well reduced to only contain, in a dated sense, that which we know is already observable, right back to the CMB event. But that is a bit of an overstated illusion, but for the hypothesis of universal isotropy and the epistemological position called uniformitarianism. Right? In terms of hard physics, this means that the laws of nature themselves are a priori and fixed and do not evolve in any way. I have no reason to doubt that. But the worry comes when we honestly try to grok how big even just the visible universe really is. I mean, it is big, very big. Most can't even fathom how big and not be deluding themselves. In fact, I once read the total amount of energy captured by all instruments pointed out into space is barely equivalent on E equals mc squared terms to the mass energy of a cigarette butt. So let's say by now it's a whole cigarette's worth. Well, that fraction of the total amount of energy available to capture and observing the rest of the universe is so tiny a slice, that should shake our superficial confidence we know anything about it at all, right? Like the amount of it being the visible universe, which is really that which might be seen of the universe, that we have viewed, is so insignificant as to belie any knowing of it at all. Yet somehow we sure seem to, don't we? So, what happened there? Worse still, right? We do not know what lies beyond this very abstract and not concrete boundary, but by this novel semantic use, right? Observable versus forever beyond observation. Like the first is observable is a pure concept, whereas forever beyond observation is a pragmatic limit, an empirical limit. So the universe that is in pure, i.e. in local to itself terms, potentially observable, is much larger than the 93 billion light years in diameter. It may already be infinite for all we know, but it is simply unobservable by us, assuming the constancy of the speed of light and the measure and understanding of the source of the Hubble and partially the exotic expansion of sound. However, even with this real virtual boundary fatally dividing a bigger reality between what we can and cannot pragmatically observe versus what we may not ever observe at all on any or other terms, there is a subsense here of not being pragmatically observable. I do wish to defend a tiny bit here, as I've done. Right? It raises the concern that much of what we observe now in the cosmos only gives us information of what those observed now hear things, right? Now here we observe things, but because the light has to travel, we're not seeing those objects as they are then and there, right? So this is why we're seeing the past. We have or know of no way to observe what these same regions, these same event object origins taken of past space-time, right, relative us, but also reconciled back to the same Big Bang singularity are doing now, right? And many, likely most of the things that we place in the universe some distance and time away probably don't exist at all, right? Whatever's going on now is a product of those things' transformation, but we have no way of knowing but for the assumption of isotropy and uniformitarianism. So if this is going to become these sorts of sub-distinctions around how observations are made now and then and here and there will become more important when we move to the next diagram. So, in addition, if we grant the possibility an entire universe is required just for life and mind on Earth, such that we can never know about other lives or mind in abiding in it because of this, or perhaps they only exist elsewhere forever beyond our observation because they only exist outside our visible universe, then this alien life or mind, is forever unobservable by us for one or both of those reasons, right? Or this is all there is, which seems a more pessimistic view once we understand the scales involved, right? The more we see, the more we know what we see could never tell us all of what it is, was, or will become, nor of any limits to that either. Right? I'm with the Buddhist in this. This existing occurs and reoccurs in these kalpas they speak of. So again, another problematic entity here is in the model zero, right? The real nothing. I say that with some derision. So it stands for the Big Bang singularity, but it is not, of course, a real or perfect nothing. It is so often gets conventionally represented, right? Zero volume, infinite energy. All physical laws break down. The Big Bang singularity has also been deductively and inductively retroductive of it as having an implicit structure expressed in terms of the tractable mathematical character of its entailed inner configuration and informational space, right? This is describable via an asymptotic limit in representation only as it approaches pure space-time scale lawlessness, right? But perhaps it never achieves such a state in literally physical terms. So only in this model. So I'm going to be soon making the argument with overdetermined, the exotic inflationary page. So we fail to take the lesson of how our models are constructed and how that might be tainting our interpretations. We're overdetermining the character of reality on the basis of objects in our models, not on the basis of them so tractically representing and referring to those real objects unproblematically as this beautiful cone story otherwise describes. Instead, isn't it also possible and unavoidable yet perverse idealization of certain forms of representational vehicularization are being conflated with false or conceptually overwrought targets here? To date, we still only largely assume nature realizes such totalizing laws so universally and fundamentally, but we can't really say we know that they exist this way with any certainty, right? The concept natural law proves as hard to analyze out as reconciling quantum mechanics with general relativity does. So then, are we not, by the time we retrodict from laws we've only really assumed actually so transparently and directly represent the real fundamentality and universality, risk retrodicting too rapaciously by denying the interpretive worries possibly owed these many representational approximations, right? Even if we only really fall off the interpretive wagon so dangerously when pushing far enough back to demand the conception of the real existence of a Big Bang so directly from the model's representational vehicle's character alone in the first place, right? I submit there's a very real possibility we are at best only proposing the existence of a real Big Bang over the hidden and so denied limits owed all the simplifications in the models we already know are conceived in terms no real object could ever exhibit, i.e. those made just in an ideal terms like point particles. They're not real. Real infinities, we don't like those, but they're okay in math. Perfect gases, laminar flows. Sine theta equals theta for small angles. These things are littered all over our deductions. I don't think all our deductions are they're open premise line deductions in a lot of cases. So all these arbitrary first order impositions of boundary conditions too, right? Motivated as these open premise lines leading to prohibitively localized, never non-locally final definition. So aren't further possible errors of interpretation invoked if none of the laws of hard physics turn out as fundamental or universal as supposed? That's quick take back to the diagram here, right? It's a classical kludge. A classical kludge. Oh, Jesus H. Christ. So it's a classical kludge. Sorry, this is just such a nightmare. Because of the assumption of university and fundamental. So this is the divide and conquer pair that I think have led us so far down the garden path that it might be too late for us to change course, to change to the needed novel epistemic course. right? And where was I here? Okay. Worse, and regardless. It seems to be exactly here, right? At the Big Bang singularity. At the very possibly vanishing and self-represented epistemic limits of the model, where the laws we must assume to exist to even be able to first represent a real Big Bang are in this very self-same model also represented consistently as literally breaking down there too. Yet we don't even see the possibility of an interpretive problem in this at all. And more damningly, it is a metalogical problem exactly because in a sub-metaphorical sense, at least we, when imagining at the Big Bang singularity as pure rationalists, armchair philosophers, also seem to be interpreting over another general to particular contradiction in this, right? It's the laws that got us there just to show they break down here as well. But I thought the problem with smuggling in contradictions invisibly was you could then prove whatever you please. So aren't we misinterpreting over this same logical fault point? If the model tells us the laws break down as we run the model back in time, isn't that an absurdio for the universality and fundamentality of those laws in the first place? That's what I would argue. Isn't it possible we are cherry-picking interpretations to suit hidden and deeply denied metaphysical biases? Oh yes, the original sin problem. So this by now very normalized graphical metaphor of the visible cosmos in the end begs so many metaphysical questions that any hope to endorse this is what the universe is all and only about seems a prima facie non-starter to me. I mean, am I to believe the universe, a thing supposed created from nothing, right? Creation ex nihilo, is all there is to being? I mean, the diagram itself tends to suggest there's always an outside, whatever containment we might mathematically or observationally define. We've just extended the containment problem to a set of beyonds, right? Endless beyonds. So is this all there is to being? I mean, I'm going to use being as a semantic placeholder for the possibility there's more to reality than whatever the best knife takes on reality end up meaning best. So I'm going to elide, I'm going to contract, I'm going to narrow the scope of the definition of reality to start to just being reality as perception, but we'll get that to that later. Okay. Oh yes, yeah. Look, so being dated existence is all I'm trying to get at there, right? So consider the case of the dodo. The dodo, we have evidence, incontrovertible evidence of a modern kind that these creatures existed. Now they don't, but unlike Sherlock Holmes, who will never exist, but is also seems to have the same status of the dodo, I would say that Sherlock Holmes exists as a fictional character now, and at whatever date he was created into whatever date we lose the encodings of his stories, but he has no being. Whereas the dodo, which doesn't exist at all now, still has being. This is, I think, a useful distinction. So one problem this image courts then is this: it shows a bounded whole over time. So this is already implying a tensed version of reality, right? It's suggesting a block universe metaphysic. But it also accidentally suggests the universe also exists in some unbounded contained beyond that. I mean, how could it not? It's it's been contingently and finitely drawn within a canvas, and that begs implicit tacit endorsement of a morology too. So this is an artifact of the constraint of finite graphical representation. But to the unsophisticated, it reinforces this poorly metaphysical Newtonian legacy problem of the mind as a container for thoughts. And of course, the box is the brain somehow. And I just think this is just not a tenable hypothesis given a better interpretation of on the ground facts. So, you know, this is why I asked this question here. Right? Or is this outside time and space, though it's a proper part of reality? I don't know. I don't think there's as much clarity in this diagram in interpretation as people think. So this is an unbelievable literal interpretation all on its own, and I call it a Bild, Denkwerkzeug, which is German for image thought tool, just to try some coining. One central problem concerns whether we adopt a perdurantist or endurantist notion of space-time, as I mentioned before. We're not going to wake those dogs up. But I've also taken shots at this. So this is, I think, the strength of my reinterpretation is in as much how I link together a bunch of things in ways that are entailed by the process of their creation. It's not, I'm not forcing them together. I'm not presenting a kludge. It's going to look like one, but I think it holds together, and I'm going to bring aspects to this root metaphor that are missing and should be part of it, is what I think. So this is the Newtonian legacy problem, right? The metaphysics of the universe is buried by outdated, gloss-denied, and even incredulous assumptions. And these are the ones that largely fail to take the confirmation of quantum non-locality in particular to heart, right? So instead we're assuming cosmic coincidences that belie credulity, tautological things such as the anthropic principle. And then there's this pernicious bias about our existentiality due to our rare embeddedness within a stable gravitational field, right? That's where we got the impulse to create or discover Newtonian mechanics. But if you are to be placed in an arbitrary origin within the universe, the probability of you landing in a stable, survivable gravitational field is effectively zero. Well, we should expect that our gravity-born existences would be biased in exactly the sort of way towards this local, embodied way of thinking about everything in the universe. And I think we miss a lot here. It's just some further points of interest, and I'll wrap up. This will probably be the longest and most awkward of all the slides, so hopefully you'll find them a little shorter and they'll flow a little better. But this was the monster I had to tackle. So I want to draw in Easter eggs or other things that I think my reinterpretation is going to help shed light on. And one of these is, how do we explain life in the context of the second law? If you know, the ability to create order when embedded in larger scale energy fluxes seems to me to be the hallmark of vitality that isn't properly appreciated. So my short answer here is we're going to look, that explanation is also going to fall epistemically to the source of the Big Bang singularity's intrinsic phase space, right? And we don't have a clue. This is the elephant that's under the rug. It's a real nothing full of inner structure that somehow determines the very possibility of what I think is the emergence of the second law. And yet we continue to believe that this cone is a literal interpretation. Oh, well, that's really unfortunate. All right, well, I'm just going to ignore that. So yes, I won't say too much on more. This will come up again. I do want to, I think I'm just going to pause this for a second. All right, I'm just going to try reading that copy again now that annoying phone call. You never think of it all. So it always follows this explaining what I think is the emergence of the second law. It's not a fundamental nor necessary law. There aren't going to be any of those in the long run. But it's an emergent law, and I believe it emerges with life at the level of quantum mechanics. And a lot of physicists are talking about quantum mechanics and the models and theories involved as purely informationally based. So my own interpretation here, which I'm not getting through their mathematizations and the work they're doing, is very consistent with that interpretation. So explaining the second law always falls epistemically to the source of the Big Bang singularity's intrinsic phase space, whose own origin is by now at best a redoubled mystery, barely spoken of. Even as it is continually swept right out from under the rug covering reality, one assumes this lately falls to the string theorists to cash out, to finally and totally explain how this same source also continues to drive in the more purely assumed to be largely only gravitationally driven agglutinations of this most basic and mundane form of matter possible, right? The largely the 10 to the 80 primordial or original, there's that word, or first protons, 10 to the 80, into all the most easily perceived cosmic furniture of reality, right? Let's not forget this in turns finally explaining the creation of all the life-seeding chemical detritus through star evolution into the much more fully periodically tabled universe, as well as explaining the source of all of these higher scale but top-down emerging stable energy fluxes and other information bearing structure pervading the entire cosmos. Like the cosmos is not empty. Our evolved fitness of perception could in no way be selected to see what's actually there, what is real there. And because we're so weighted down into the concrete, these vortexes of mass energy, and we just lack the skill to see that the universe is much more full of structure and developmental intent and even telos than we have conceived. And if we could grasp this, I think this would help change our ethical course, right? Somehow the intrinsic phase space of the Big Bang sources both of these, the top-down and bottom-up development of the universe. And all of this comes from the impetus of a point encapsulating effectively infinite energy in a space with no volume, no epistemic problems here, right? I think you know what my answer is. There we go. So, reignoring the infinitely energized couldn't possibly be part of reality, yet not even finitely volume elephant in the room. I think radically different kinds of emergence are driven by each former change in the rate of cosmic expansion, and there's going to be exotic, Hubble, pre-life, and then this late acceleration. So there's three. I think these radically different kinds of emergence are driven by each former change in the rate of cosmic expansion, the three phases, exactly for what these dynamically lowering temperature, energy, step down, and stepped up scales on average allow. Right? Shifting energy and temperature. Even as the largest matter energy fluxes sometimes go back up in energy and scale in various epochs, right? Star ignitions, supernova, colliding black holes. And even as the Earth finds the middle scale just right for life and mind to first emerge. And all while so-called empty space will literally freeze your ass off while boiling your blood for the lack of air pressure alone. But now, with a new added tip being hypothesized as happening between exotic versus Hubble expansion, and that's to come. And finally, another just after Hubble expansion starts to accelerate. So my way of teasing apart the kludge, which is the next video, is still going to be well marked by categorically distinct and well vetted changes of acceleration in the universe growth in volume, at least, right? This is a very principled marking then, one perhaps even explaining why these accelerations have happened. One minor point here, I think the naming of a dark age, I think this is a little unneeded. It's some what I would call obscuring anthropomorphism. Yes, there was no appreciable amounts of visible light because after the CMB, all you have is this microwave radiation, but that's still light. So this is this human bias, this little narrow bit in the middle that we call light, we should know better, is just brethren to a vaster range of electromagnetic phenomena. So if there is any light at all, electromagnetic radiation, it's not a dark age for that on my interpretation. I'm not going to refer to that anymore. And I think I've done a good enough job here to set the background for the remaining 6 videos to come. I apologize for some of the technical difficulties. I did have to make some changes, but I hope you got something of value out of this video if you watched it to the end, and I hope you'll watch the videos to come. I'm M. Brian Palmer, the unknown philosopher. Have yourself a lovely day.